Welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT how to play video. We're all still in the process of learning what's going to be good in the meta, and there's still a lot being discovered, but there's one build in particular doing quite well, and that's Brawler Blaster. Harkening back to the days of yesteryear when Jinx Brawler was one of the most dominant builds in set 1, this build is the same concept with slight differences. Today our expert analyst will be breaking down this build so you can get out there and use it to climb in ranked. But before we begin, please do not forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our GiantSlayerTV social media pages. Time to dive back into the video, and to start it off, let's talk about the core items in Brawler Blaster. If any of you remember the itemization from set 1, then this composition will sound very familiar, as you're going to want to give your main carry, Jinx, a lot of attack damage items. Giant Slayer was buffed going into set 3, and once again is a core item on Jinx. Alongside that, you can grab a Deathblade, Infinity Edge, or Last Whisper as other strong physical damage items. Hands down, the best utility item to give her is Red Buff, which can also be given to any other blaster, though Lucian is the most common. Defensive items can be Guardian Angel, Quicksilver, or Trap Claw depending on what other players are playing, though Guardian Angel is always a safe option. As mentioned, Red Buff is one of the best items for this composition as it pairs incredibly well with the blaster trait, and it was buffed in set 3 to do quite a bit more damage over time. Other items to look for in this build can be typical frontline items such as Bramble Vest or Guardian Angel, which can be given to Vi or Cho'Gath. A new item that's worth considering is Shroud of Stillness. Place it on a front line so you can maneuver it around as needed. Zephyr is always a great option, whether you use it to lift an enemy frontline champion or get great use out of it on your Blitzcrank in one of the corners. That way he will lift up the corner champion and grab a unit closer to the middle of the back row, which can oftentimes win you a fight if you snag a carry. Lastly, if you're able to get Misfortune later in the game, it's best to give her items built from a tier. One of the best is Seraph's, though Hand of Justice is not bad either since it can roll extra damage. Moving on to the next section, it's time to go over the core champions of Brawler Blaster. As the name of the composition suggests, you're going to be wanting to run 4 Brawlers and 4 Blasters at level 8 as your core build. Jinx is the main carry and the most important champion of the build, so make sure you're aiming to 2-star her very quickly. She may be quite contested as this build is fairly popular, and since she's also a rebel, she's often played in another popular build, 6 Rebels. To round out the other blasters, you're going to want Ezreal, Misfortune, and either Lucian or Graves. Misfortune can be tricky to find, so playing Graves and Lucian is fine to do in the meantime. Graves, despite being a 1-cost champion, can actually be playable late game over Lucian because his ultimate can counter other attack-based compositions. Vi, Cho'Gath, Malphite, and Blitzcrank are the 4 brawlers that will be added over the course of the game. Malphite and Blitzcrank are generally found and played early game, with Vi and Cho'Gath being found often around the mid game. Blitzcrank is especially useful as he is also a chrono, which gives you 2 chrono when paired with Ezreal. Overall, it shouldn't be too hard to 2-star any of these champions, though Cho'Gath will be a bit harder to hit if there are any other brawler players in the lobby. With items and champions out of the way, let's talk about each section of the game, beginning with the early game. The early game in set 3 hasn't quite been as figured out as in the previous set, but there's a few important concepts to consider early on. One of those concepts is the change to how much easier it is to get a max streak going. Previously, it required 7 wins or losses, and now it's only 4. That means you really want to maintain one or the other for as long as possible in the early game. Ideally, you're going to want to go on a win streak to maintain high health, but it's totally viable to lose streak from the early rounds to Krugs. The other big change to streaks is now that you'll earn additional gold on PvE rounds, so it's even more important to have a streak going into those rounds. The second concept is along the same lines, as it's about the economy, but essentially you're going to be poor in the early game. With reduced passive gold, not being able to get your gold or champions from medium loot orbs, and the first carousel being 1-cost champions means you're going to have way less gold. So how do you approach the early game? Basically look to play for either a win or loss streak as best you can. If you're lucky and get a few extra gold drops from the early PvE rounds, you can turn that into an aggressive lead and try to win streak by having more upgraded champions than other players being able to level early. If you only got items and you're struggling to hit any 2-star champions, it's often best to sit back and play for a loss streak to maximize the gold you earn from losing until the round after Krugs. There are a few strong early game traits. One of the best to look for is actually Cybernetic, as you can have a large power spike with only 3 champions and components. Red buff Lucian with Cybernetics is one of the strongest openings by far and transitions very well into Brawler Blaster. Finding an early Malphite is a key starting starting point to transition from later, and you can actually complement him with early Rebel bonus. Otherwise, your goal is to just 2-star what you can and try to maximize the gold you're earning. Standard leveling times are still up in the air right now, but leveling to 4 at 2-2 and 5 at 2-5 are great if you're able to win streak. Otherwise, hold off on leveling until Krugs. If you have any items that are useful for Jinx later in the game, it's totally fine to jam them in early. Just give them to an auto attack champion like Xayah that you're going to sell later. Keep in mind that you're not going to have a lot of gold early game, so don't overfill your bench too much. Try to only pick up essential champions to your mid-game build, that being brawlers and blasters, and any champions that you're able to get 2-starred should be played on your board and not sitting on your bench collecting dust. As we're moving towards level 6, it's time to transition into the next stage of the game, the mid-game. The timing for level 6 is a bit off right now, but the standard timing of leveling at 3-2 is still the most common and fine time to do it. If you're able to sit on 50 gold for a few rounds at this stage, you can do so instead of leveling to 6 and do a slow level instead. This is only advised if you've been win streaking beforehand or if you haven't lost a lot of health, as the stage damage begins to ramp up as we move into stage 4. Ultimately, your goal is to get to level 8 with an okay economy and above 50 health. The earlier you find a Jinx, the better, so in general, it's advisable to level at standard timings to keep up a good leveling curve to increase your chances of finding her naturally. As mentioned, level to 6 around 3-2, and then from there, 7 after Wolves on 4-1. The timing may change if you've been able to win streak and have a ton of extra gold, as you can level to 7 on 3-5 if you have at least 30 gold left over. In general, you don't want to roll much at level 7, but if you do have a lot of pairs or are losing every round, you may just need to roll. Your primary goal is to find Jinx, but upgrading Lucian, Ezreal, Blitzcrank, and Vi is your secondary goal when you roll at level 7. Finding Cho'Gath is also a nice bonus, as you can move your composition to 4 Brawler and 3 Blaster at level 7. Don't worry about having Jinx 2 or Cho'Gath 2, as they can be difficult to 2-star at this level without rolling a ton of gold. Aim to level to 8 between rounds 4-3 and 5-1 whenever you're able to do so, as long as you have at least 30 gold left over after leveling. From there, you will roll to stabilize if you've been losing each round. Otherwise, you can slow play it and roll if you're above 40 gold down to 30 for a few rounds. Look to fill the gaps of your build and 2-star what you have, especially Jinx 2 and Cho'Gath 2 being your main priority. After stabilizing at level 8 and we're past Raptors going into stage 5, it's a good time to start talking about the late game. This stage of the game is a bit of the Wild West at the moment on how to best approach it in the new set, but there's a few things to keep in mind at this point of the game. One is making sure that you've got at least all of your core champions 2-starred, and the other is picking up your late game transitional champions. For Brawler Blasters, this will be Miss Fortune, and whichever path you choose to go at level 9, whether it's 3 Cybernetic, Rebel, or another legendary champion. Your build in the late game prior to level 9 should look like this: Jinx, Ezreal, Lucian, Graves, or Miss Fortune, Vi, Cho'Gath, Malphite, and Blitzcrank. Whenever you find a Miss Fortune, you can put her in immediately and take out either Graves or Lucian. Every champion besides Miss Fortune should be 2-starred, and if they aren't, you're gonna want to roll to do so. If you're capped, then it's a good time to save an econ towards level 9 while you pick up additional Miss Fortunes you find along the way, including any upgrades to her ultimate that show up in your shop. The win condition for Brawler Blaster is Jinx 2 with good items and Miss Fortune 2. It is possible to look for Jinx 3, which is usually going to net you a first place, but it's only worth doing if you have high health and a strong economy in the late game. Generally, it's just going to be better to roll down and look for Miss Fortune 2 and other upgrades more so than to go for the Jinx 3. Vi and Blitzcrank are also decent options to 3-star if you're able to, so look to pick them up to fill out your bench. Outside of those conditions, one of the most important parts of this build late game is positioning. While it's not overly complicated, it's incredibly important to keep your Jinx in a position that lets her do work without instantly getting killed or CC'd. Try to keep your Jinx near the corner on the same side as Blitzcrank, as that's one of the best ways to get her ultimate going. Blitzcrank will pull a champion, and after he knocks it up, Jinx will turn to attack that target. Make sure you're scouting each round to see what the best place to place your Blitzcrank is, as pulling a harder to kill champion can sometimes be a detriment more than a benefit. If other players have large AoE, it's best to spread out your champions as best you can, though always keep your Jinx nearby your Blitzcrank. Miss Fortune works well in a corner, but be aware of any Blitzcranks enemies may have. Try to keep Cho'Gath where the bulk of enemy champions are positioned, so he takes enough damage to get get his ult off early. Vi should be positioned on the same starting side as Blitzcrank so she doesn't use her ability on the target he pulls. This is because she may knock your Jinx out of the position as she jumps onto that champion, so making sure she goes to the further away enemies is absolutely critical. One trick you can do, though it does require there to be no enemy Blitzcranks, is block in your Jinx on the right side corner with Blitzcrank next to her and another champion, usually Lucian, above her. This makes it so melee champions can't easily get onto her, which is great if anyone is playing infiltrators or melee heavy compositions. That is all for today's video. There's a ton of new builds popping up every day as everyone is figuring out the best way to play the current set, but so far Brawler Blaster has proven to be quite consistent. Let us know in the comment section below if you've been having any success with this build. We'll see you all in the next Giant Slayer TFT video, so make sure to like and subscribe and you'll get notified when we go live.